We're going to give folks a chance to get connected to audio. Thank you for joining us tonight. Again, just giving folks a couple minutes here to get connected. My name is Natalie. I work with the project team. Folks are still jumping in, so I'm just going to give it a second. Thank you for joining the meeting tonight. As I said, my name is Natalie and I work with the project team. A quick overview
Hello,
on
Natalie. This is Brett, over here in the Delta region.
Okay. Would you mind just putting yourself on mute just so we can kick off the meeting? Thank you. So thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Again, just ask out of courtesy that everybody put themselves on mute. That gives everybody in the meeting an equitable chance to listen to the presentation. As you have questions, if you could please drop those in the chat. My colleague Tracy is going to put a comment in there now, and then we'll be monitoring the chat as the meeting progresses tonight. And then at the end, we will open it up to Q&A and take those questions in the order that they were received. So with that, I am going to turn it over to the Everett Housing Authority team first I'll talk a little bit about the agenda. So tonight's meeting, again, this is a continuation of many discussions that we've had, several discussions we've had so far just about the project itself and how we're moving through the process. So tonight we're going to be giving you an update on, first we'll just talk about the housing authority itself, talk about the housing need and opportunities and the focus of this project in the Delta neighborhood, talk about the evolution of the design. We have a lot of new information to share with you tonight, and then talk about schedule and next steps. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason to talk a little bit about the housing authority. Jason?
Thanks very much, Natalie. Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Morrow. I am the Director of Development for the Housing Authority. It's lovely to see all of you tonight. Many of you are familiar faces, and for those of you that are here for the first time, we welcome you to this discussion. We look very much forward to all the input that we expect to receive in dialogue this evening, and we're truly helpful to have a collaborative dialogue about how we can improve the design thinking and the general conceptual thinking behind the evolution of the Park District. The intent tonight is to showcase the very hard work of the design team and the collaboration that's taken place over several prior meetings, community meetings, as well as public planning commission and council meetings. The aim is to showcase the inputs that we have collated and are now seen in the design outcomes. And the intent really is just to have an open discussion following presentation, in which our aim is to illustrate not only the design outcomes from a housing perspective, but also the public benefit that we're introducing through this project. And from my perspective, key to that is the social engagement that's being created in the civic spaces through many of the partnerships that we have worked hard and diligently on to bring community amenities to Delta. And so with that, if you can move to the next page slide, I would appreciate that. Very quick note for those of you who aren't so familiar with the history, the Everett Housing Authority has owned this land since the early 40s. We've been in the neighborhood for 40 years. The deep desire of the Housing Authority is to continue to be in the neighborhood for another 80 years. We have very large investment aimed at the transformation of the former Baker Heights public housing into a community of opportunity that provides access for everyone in the neighborhood, but also access for others to enter the neighborhood and have access to decent housing, as well as excellent resources in the community and public amenity sense. It is intended to be a mixed income housing project. We are very focused on the curation of civic and retail amenity needs. And with that, I'll leave it for the design team to further present. Tonight's presentation will be first presented by Leslie Bain of Framework. She's the urban design lead and leads the largest of our overall team. Ted Panton of GGO Low will walk you through the architecture, and then Bob Bankford will finish up from Makers and walk y'all through what is going on in terms of the permitting, the administration, and what next steps might be. And so with that, I would thank you all once again for attending tonight. It's great to see such high attendance, and we appreciate all comments and look forward to the discussion. Leslie?
Great, thanks. Thanks, Jason. Next slide, please, Natalie. So we're anxious to share the design with you as it's moving along, but I just wanted to ground everybody in the idea of the needs and the opportunities. Having a site this size and in need of new life is an incredible opportunity. So we want to both meet city goals and EHA goals and the goals of the community. So just grounding those a little bit, we talk about these three pillars of housing, of equity and community building, and of decarbonization and sustainability towards the future. Next slide. So we live in a region with a huge need for housing. It's become a big topic at the state level with new legislation that's come out, county level and city level. And looking at Snohomish County's numbers, City of Everett needs an enormous number of new housing units. They think it's 37,000 some units by 2044. So if you look at this graphic, you can see those black houses are the existing houses representing what's existing in Everett right now, which is just a little over 47,000 housing units. The county believes we need another 37,000 housing units in the next 21 years. So it's a huge need. And you can see it, you can feel it in the, housing affordability, et cetera. And a lot of this needs to be affordable. So those green units right there, the 1,500 houses and a half, represent the number of housing units we think that we could put on the Delta neighborhood site. And so even though it's quite a few units, it's kind of a small number in the great need that we have. So one of the things is we're thinking about how to do this in a way that really creates a new model that doesn't just have a bunch of housing, but it really builds community and helps the neighborhood in the kinds of things that are missing from there now. Next slide. This is the site as Jason showed it in its earlier historic version. A lot of you probably know this site quite well. The housing has been vacant for a couple of years now, but it's a beautiful piece of property with views. It's surrounded by Baker Heights. You can see on the southwest side, Madrona Square, still under construction, just about done. Wiggums Park Place Apartments and Meadows Apartments on the north side. So there is multifamily housing surrounding the site. The wetlands are to the west, and Wiggums Hollow Park provide green spaces. Boys and Girls Club, you can see in the elementary school just on the west and northwest. The hospital off in the distance, and Washington State University's campus and Everett Community College. So there's a lot going on around this site. It's a real opportunity that's pretty unique to have this much acreage in a spot that has these things going for it. Okay, next slide. Another one of the things that the city is really serious about is the need for equity and equitable development in the city. This is a graphic from the mayor's 2021 Everett initiative. And the way that Everett Housing Authority looks at this in the next slide is the idea of building communities of opportunity. So having housing in places where people have access to transit, they have access to education, they have access to jobs. So the site is really well located in that regard. You can see within a 15-20 minute walk, you can get to the hospitals, to the children's clinic, to Everett Community College, Washington State University. There's transit through the site, and transit on Broadway a few blocks away, and East Moraine View Drive to the east. So there's a lot in this neighborhood that can help create opportunities for the people that live there and will live there in the future. Next. On the other hand, there are pieces missing in the neighborhood that we've heard from people. They would love a place to get a cup of coffee. They would like a place they could go with their kid and get ice cream after a game. Stay back on the equity one, 2 back. There you go. EHA and the team have been active in looking at opportunities to bring needed things into the neighborhood, including childcare, early education. We're hoping to bring a library there, small businesses. And KSER is interested in a gathering place that could have concerts and places to hang out. And these are things that we're working really hard to incorporate into the design. Okay, next. Decarbonization, sustainability. The city of Everett has a climate action plan that's very ambitious, looking at reducing greenhouse gases by 50% by 2030. That's not that far away. So we want to be part of helping to make walkable communities where you don't have to drive everywhere, of using sustainable construction. Next slide. So this is an image, and you don't have to read the fine print, but this is an image of the strategies that the city has for decarbonization. And the one with the big blue arrow is to support intentional high density development, because that is a much more sustainable way of developing than developing very, very low densities. So the ones with the gray arrows are things that we can incorporate in our design. Next slide. So those include that intentional high density development, which we are hoping to be a model for Everett, a model for the region of building neighborhoods, of building communities. So of building housing, but not just the housing, of places that are walkable and bikeable, that has buildings that are using sustainable materials and site design. That's stormwater, that is, you can see in the picture there, the idea of using heavy timber, which would also be supporting an industry that could be an important piece of Everett's economy, of creating parks and gardens, and additional tree canopy. That was something we heard at a neighborhood meeting a few weeks ago. And we know people love their community gardens. So getting people in contact with nature and with food. Okay, next. So these are some of the things that we've heard as desired community benefits. So these community serving civic uses like the library and KSER, of neighborhood retail that will serve the neighborhood, that you don't have to walk too far to go to meet your daily needs, to invest in the community, the trees, community gardens, a network of open spaces, and a housing supply that will provide opportunities for the existing neighbors and for the new people that would come to live there. So these community benefits are part of the ask for the increased density on the site. Next slide. So Bob Bangford will talk a little bit more in detail about the process, but just to orient you, there was master planning and early outreach done in 2021. The design phase started last year. We had some meetings with folks in January. And so we've been working hard to get a design that we think does the best that to meet some of these things that are our goals. There are environmental review processes coming up. There are city approvals coming up. But right now, this is where the design is, and we're putting it out there for you to take a look at. Tell us what you think, talk about community benefits in particular. So this design will have to go through these environmental and permitting processes, but it's the design that we hope meets a lot of the needs and opportunities of the site. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ted to start walking through the design.
Great. Thanks, Leslie. And I'm just going to request control to see if I can advance slides. And not seeing it quite yet. Bear with me.
It's been granted, so you should see it
Okay.
now.
just going to try to advance the slide. Yeah, I'm not seeing the controls on my screen for whatever reason. So maybe we just stick with the system we've been using here. Oops, sorry, go back one. Yeah, so just I've joined the team as the architect, and all the great work that had been done to date. Just want to acknowledge. But if we could go back to the team slide for just a moment. That would be going backwards. Just wanted to give a shout out to our other team members. We don't expect you to see all of these, but this gives you an order of magnitude of the amount of expertise and design talent that's been focused on this project, and it's been a great to be a part of it. Next slide, please. Oh wait, I can see it now. It's at the very bottom. It's a little orange button there. I didn't see it before. So I'm going to talk about design, as I mentioned, and we're breaking this down into a few buckets. Leslie mentioned a lot about the neighborhood and the outreach done to date. So as the design lead, we've really been looking at the context and the neighborhood connections as a real prime impetus for generating the design. We also have focused on the program, and a program is just a fancy word to describe the uses for the project. This project has a rich family of uses that include civic elements like a library, as well as family-focused supportive uses like daycare and early childhood education. So we're really excited about how that is going to generate the sense of place here. And let's see, one more. Oops, I'm going to go back. And then open space. The heart of the project, as you'll see, is a significant open space, but it's also the core of a network of open spaces that includes the park itself, some edge buffering, and then lastly, we wanted to talk about the height to open space relationships and how the open space relates to how we've generated the shapes of the buildings and how high they are and what's next to what in terms of adjacencies. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and show you the plan. You can see it here. There's sort of what appears to be fog around it, a foggy area that just sort of shows you the limits or the boundaries of where we are, so that the Everett Housing Authority phases you can see a bit more clearly. So really what's the core of the project is the infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier, there's Poplar Street to the west, there's Hemlock Street down the center there, and First Street down along the very east side. Those are all existing street names that will be sort of reconfigured, if you will, with some of the new grading and the alignments that are happening. Then there's also a new street that you see there called Cross Street, and that will be running more in the east-west direction. And that will really add, I think, an extra dimension to the project as far as accessibility and how you get into it. The definition of some of these building edges, we're very excited about that. I think also as a core principle, we're really looking at walkability and, you know, building off the existing context and making the existing neighborhood, which is very walkable, just really enhancing that in any way that we can. And I'm just going to advance the slide again. It's not showing up. Oop, there we go. Just going to highlight Madrona Square, what we're calling a green edge here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but that text just came up on the very top of the screen. And then lastly, Wiggums over to the north. And I was going to mention also, north is to the right of your screen in this image. So just be aware of that because the site is sort of long and narrow, not too narrow, but just rectangular. We really wanted to sort of have it lay out on the sheet so that you could read it. So north is to your right and west is up. So in terms of neighborhood connections, I mentioned, I think one of the big ones that we are excited about is the connection to the wetland. And you can see that at the top of the screen. There's really going to be a strong visual sense that you're adjacent to this really great natural resource. And as we develop our plans, that's not part of the scope of our work, but it does create a wonderful asset to the west of the project. And especially as you're walking down Poplar, you'll really be able to experience that. And folks that come and visit will also get a sense of that and be able to sort of get that dynamic. And just going back one, I was also going to mention, there's also on the other end of the spectrum, the core of our project, which is shown there in that circle, is really a more formal park-like element that is sort of another way of expressing sort of a deep green commitment that the project has. And I think with the two together, the sort of deep green of the wetland and our more formal park, we'll be able to give residents and visitors in the neighborhood a really positive experience. And that's one of the reasons we've sort of coined it the Parks District, is really just has that attribute to it. There is a really great adjacency with Hawthorne Elementary School, and just going to show you some of how we see it connecting. We find that Poplar Street has just a really great opportunity to create an engaging and walkable frontage that would allow students and other folks related to the school a really safe route to school. I know that's a challenge for all schools. My daughter's school is on just off Aurora here in Seattle, and it's a constant struggle. It's a constant point of discussion with our parent group about how to safely get our kids to and from her high school. So seeing this here, to me as a parent, is just like really, I think it's a really attractive relationship for kids to have, just be able to have this walkable resource just to the south of their school. I was also going to mention the retail uses, which, you know, some of that's still getting figured out. There's an intent for us to have some food and beverage elements, and as well as a market and things of that nature, but all of that sort of takes some time to evolve. And so what we'll be showing you here is sort of the intent. And it really starts with what we consider a gateway to the project on 12th Street. Leslie refers to this as sort of this grand entrance, or an entrance that has significance to it. Really, in one way, it's going to be engaging the context to the north, but bringing people in off this 12th Street frontage, down Hemlock is really the start of this retail sequence. And my controls just went away again. And that will take you to the south. You can see the orange pathway that you would take, or circulation route you would take. And that would take you into the heart of the project, where we have these other retail uses, as well as the radio station and some other elements that you could see connect you back up to Poplar. So this is just a really early image that gives you a sense of what we would like 12th Street to feel like. If you're walking up from the north to the south, right to Hemlock Street, you would see buildings on either side. We really like the idea of creating a variety of languages here that all sort of fall within a very, what I would consider like a domestic affirmative, or very supportive of residential uses, both the ones that are off-site and also expressing a lot of that with the building character themselves. And you can see like balconies and window spaces that suggest living spaces that really create a positive engagement there. I don't think I can point very well with my tool, but if you can see my cursor, the library, which there's a very faint signage there for the library. That's where we kind of see the anchor to the 12th Street entrance. And on the opposite side, we would hope to have like a market. So you would have like these two really great community uses that would come into play there. So just reviewing quickly the neighborhood connections, there is the connection to Wiggins Hollow, which we can show there. And let's see, just going to go through these a little bit quicker because we've already talked a bit about open space. There's Wiggins Hollow. Much like Poplar, we would see that to be a really walkable street that gets you from the neighborhood to the park. So as I mentioned earlier, what the term we use, program, we're really talking about the uses of the project. And I've talked to our team about this. There's just a really unique set of uses here with the library, the radio station, really creating a civic sort of sense of gravity, if you will, and then complementing that with retail. So what we're really hoping is that as you engage the project and as you walk through one of the streets or down through the open space, you would really get a sense of belonging and that you're at the heart of this community. And what you're seeing here is the view looking north on Hemlock as you walk up to our main open space. And across the way, you can see there sort of sense of the architecture scale, the size of the buildings. And as we get further along, you'll be able to see this a little bit clearer. I did want to mention when we talk about uses, this is just giving you a quick diagram of where they might fall or where we see them sort of implemented. The retail use core is really just to the north of the park there on Hemlock. And as we go further, kind of to the northeast, there would be the library and the early childhood education and the childcare. Those two functions really creating a strong core for the project. And also just being able to engage the existing assets in the community, like the school, Wiggums Hollow, and our new park itself. If we zoom in a little bit closer, our intent is really to create what you would call a two-sided street on Hemlock, which is really like a classic retail scenario where you have really active uses on either side, and it makes it really engaging for people to walk along. There's obviously the signage associated with the retailers and their storefronts that we would see as creating a really positive atmosphere. And the library at the corner, really holding that corner and being a very visible edge to the project. And I'm just kind of throwing some arrows in here so you could kind of see that these are all going to be cross-street neighbors and, you know, just only separated by 60, 65 feet or so. So as you walk down this street, this north reach of Hemlock, you'd really get a sense of being just in a really classic urban environment with these great uses on either side. And then the early childhood education, this gets a little bit into the specifics of the grading of the project, but we really see that holding the corner down on First Street, which does have a grade difference. There's a lot of particulars when it comes to resolving those grades that we're still in process of balancing out, but we see that as being a real potential opportunity, because you would get sort of a daylight basement, if you will, down on First Street that's going to allow that street frontage to be really, really positive. And I apologize, my controls are kind of coming and going. So here's just that same view that we were looking at earlier, with the park space being this sort of really what we would hope is a celebratory core, you know, really being able to use that for many different things throughout the course of the year and throughout the course of the day. And here you see sort of more of a peak season, like probably what we would hope to experience about this time of year, where there could be concerts or other gatherings in the space that really foster that sense of community. Off to the right, you see the radio station. That's sort of in the shorter building, or the sort of more horizontal building there. And then off to the center and the left, you would see more retail users that would, we're hoping would be providers of food and beverage and things of that nature that make visiting this just a real positive experience for everyone. So getting into open space, that, as I mentioned, and sorry, my controls keep kind of dodging in and out. There they are again. The sort of the green buffer that we mentioned earlier on Poplar, we feel like that's a really important element. And as far as when we really laid out the project in terms of the 4 blocks that you see here, we were very conscious of that, you know, this area to the west, first of all, has existing neighbors that we want to be mindful of, but also the fact that when we determined kind of the heights of the building, that gave us some sense of where we might be placing appropriate height, bulk, and scale of the buildings. So I'm just going to click forward. I'm not seeing this quite yet. There we go. The park itself is sort of bisected, if you will, by Hemlock. And so that means there's sort of an eastern, or excuse me, a western portion of it that you see here, as well as an eastern portion, which goes all the way down to First Street. So quite significant, you know, in terms of the scale of this park and the way that the roads and the other open spaces weave into it. And lastly, as you go down onto First Street, we see another opportunity for a green buffer along there that would make for both a walkable street and also a really great adjacency for buildings. When we talk about the park itself, we are really in the process right now of settling these buildings in. but what we see is a real sense of terracing. For those of you that live in the neighborhood, you know that there's a slope to the east, and there's all the things that go along with that, that we'll need to be dealing with. But I think it's overwhelmingly positive that it allows these views off to the Cascades, which is just a real blessing. And I think anyone that visits this park would get a sense of the drama that you really get in this part of North Everett, where you're just seeing the Cascades and you're seeing, the cut of the river working its way around. And all of that, I think, just really would contribute to the sense of place and identity that we're really after. And of course, we're, to Leslie's point earlier, we're adding a lot of density here. And so we're going to do that in a way that engages and makes this a safe place. And so you can see like the living space windows looking down on the park. That's really by design and intention to have this really be a very community-based, but also have residents here feel, engaged in the open spaces as well in terms of keeping them safe. So when we look at that open space with the height distribution, I'm going to make these orange boxes where we foresee some of our taller buildings. And as you might remember from our open space discussion, these are all surrounded by, existing buffering areas or the major park. So we felt like that was really important in terms of locating these taller structures, just giving them the buffering they need from their surrounding context and allowing them to be what they need to be. And so that kind of gives you a sense and plan of where those buffers are. And I was also going to mention that the existing Baker View apartments, which you see off to the left of the screen, are already a good 8 stories there. So they're really getting close to that same level that we're looking at with our project. And with that, we're going to show you this very preliminary view. So take this with a grain of salt. But this gives you an idea if you're a bird flying just northeast of our project and looking down on this beautiful part of town, you would really get a sense of the Olympics beyond, and obviously the Sound all to the west. But in our more immediate context, you can see just how we would propose to terrace these buildings and step them down the hillside, which really, I think, mitigates their size, but also celebrates the movement of grade down the site as well. You can see the towers located in those spots that I mentioned before are all next to the, sort of the wetland and buffering area that's on Poplar Street, excuse me. And then there's 1/4 tower that's well within sort of the inner zones of our plan. And really what we have is, what you could characterize as a wedding cake, where we really want to kind of keep it really sort of low at the edges and then gently step it up towards the middle and to the edges as we go. So that is just a really preliminary look at how we would break down the masses. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bob to talk about next steps and schedule.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Ted. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide also. And I'll just say that the team's been very anxious to present these details to the community, and we've been working very hard on the design as it shows from Ted's slides here. Let's go back to the next slide again. So this is the 5th of 5 community meetings that we've held dating back to 2021 in the master planning process, and we timed this meeting along with last week we held the planning commission meeting. Next week on the 31st, we're meeting with city council to present largely the same slideshow and information. And EHA's undertook some additional engagement activities to get this concept out there to the public. And after this, we did this so we could try to get some input from the community before we finalize the plan, the design and the package, and submit the actual application. So this has not actually been submitted officially to the city yet. Meanwhile, also the engagement with civic partners that Leslie talked about. That's going to continue through the process. And I'll talk a little bit about the PDO process. Let's go to the next slide. So at the bottom is the timeline there. You can see that in 2022, up and through February, we're working on a draft development plan. Just prior to that, we held our 4th community meeting. Actually, we held 2. We held an in-person meeting and an online meeting. And since then, we've been drafting this plan, all these slides that you're seeing tonight. And again, you can see the rest of the green space there through June and July is where we're making refinements and actually getting the full packet together to submit this application to the city. And that main application is called the Plan Development Overlay. And that's what EHA needs for this project to get flexibility on a number of different zoning issues, including building height, to be able to allow for this development. There's a number of things that we're doing that are already allowed by zoning, but there are a few things like uses and some flexibility to parking in addition to height that we are trying to get approved to do this concept that you see. So the plan development overlay, that requires planning commission recommendation and city council approval. And you can see that that's going to take several months and we'll go through planning commission meetings and city council, of which public will get an additional chance to comment at that time. Also, other approvals that we'll need include a development agreement, which requires also city council approval, an environmental impact statement, which is underway right now, that city staff will be approving. And we're also working on a street vacation process, actually vacating some streets and portions of streets, but we're also creating new right-of-way. So that's somewhat of a complicated process that will also require city council approval. So again, I'm enjoying seeing all the comments that come through. We'll be able to answer those tonight here, and looking forward to that discussion. So with that, I'll hand it back to Natalie.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. I'm going to start from the top here and start going through the questions. This first one is from Paul, and it's probably directed to the Everett Housing Authority team. And again, I'm just, as a reminder, if everyone can keep themselves on mute, that gives me a chance to kind of put the question out there and everyone to, equitably hear the response. So Paul asks, what percentage of units will be designated for non-white residents?
Question for me, I presume.
Yes.
We don't have an answer to that. We certainly don't establish any minimums or maximums on demographics. We're, just to remind everyone, we're at the very, very early stages of conceptual for a large master plan going through the rezone process. Each part of this project will be built in iterative phases. And so at the time of going through each phase, we will design each specific phase. And then once we finish construction at that point, we will open up the buildings to typical processes that also follow fair housing and other legal jurisdictions. And at that time, we will have a much better idea to exactly who are those who prefer to select those particular locations to live.
Great. Another question from Paul. He says, where are the kids going to go to school if Hawthorne and other schools close by have a high student to teacher ratio?
We wouldn't really have an answer for that question, not knowing A, that population, and B, not knowing what the school district's perspective is at this moment on adjustments to this large amount of housing that will be entering the neighborhood over the next decade.
Another question from Paul. He says, is the project moving forward regardless of community input?
I would say that the project is moving forward because of community input and has included several years of community input as illustrated tonight and as will be illustrated in future conversations. As Bum Bagford mentioned, we'll be going through additional processes with the city as we work through this rezone. Those cities' processes will allow further input from the community, and final determinants of the project moving forward under a rezone will be really through the Planning Commission, the council, as well as the city of Everett.
Bryce asks, if retail stores are on the first floor, can we have an entrance on the hill side for disabled people? I want to make sure we have accessible units near the entrance of the housing units because elevators sometimes break. Will the buildings include more than one elevator?
Yeah, I think I can take that one, unless you want it, Jason.
Please do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think accessibility is very important. Obviously, this is a hill, which presents some challenges to folks. And one of the things I think is really going to be great is on Poplar, the Safe Routes to School that Ted was talking about is a trail that's going to go through the community garden area. And it will be flat, it will be away from the street and the traffic. So it should be a really nice way to get from Baker View to transit to for kids to get to school. The bigger buildings typically have more than one elevator. So that's a good thing. And, we just want to make sure that people can get around and make sure that accessibility is part of the design.
Great. Next question from Paul. What proactive approach to building surrounding infrastructure did the city take to address our shortfall with extra residents living in the area?
Well, I could take a stab at that one. Well, this, again, the EHA has not submitted the application yet. It's going to go through this process upon which there will be a discussion about infrastructure surrounding the development. I don't know if others want to expand on that, but there's going to be discussion on amenities and things like that. But
Okay. Question from Bryce. He said, I saw pictures with a fountain area and children playing. Are we going to have a spray park area for children? And then he sent in a link to an area that was similar in Skagit County.
Yeah, this is early in the design, and I think a spray park would be awesome. There's some really nice ones out there. We've got spaces allocated for a couple of play areas. One near where the retail and the park here you can see is, and then one down on First Street where there are some good locations for childcare providers. So the design's not finished yet, but that's the kind of thing that we love to get input on, and there's certainly fun when the weather's good.
Great. Ward, you asked if we'd get a summary of this presentation. We are going to actually put this presentation up on the website, and I'll have my colleague Tracy drop that website address into the chat, and that will be up tomorrow, so you can take a look at it then. Tammy asks, she would like to learn more about the child care center. When can space be leased, rented, or is it for sale?
Quick answer is we don't have an answer for that right now. As Leslie has stated, and as I stated earlier, we're very early. We're basically at an early conceptual stage. We haven't even entered into design for any particular building for a particular phase of construction. We'll have a much better idea about what those provisions or those spaces actually end up being, and who potential tenants within those spaces might be a couple years down the road.
Paul asks, how would the project be paid for?
Many ways, but quite simply, EHA has access to the municipal bond markets, and we use those access for financing, and we also access money in a wide variety of other ways, from private banks to other public sources, depending on the particular project types and the needs.
Ryan asks, will the project include cross-laminated timber?
We certainly are focused in trying to realize that as an aspiration. We can't guarantee that. Cross-laminated timber is a very kind of nascent industry and a nascent product type, but we're very focused on working towards that goal. And we certainly would love to see cross-laminated timber buildings on the project.
Bryce asks, what's the plans for the rooftops of the buildings, and that he would love to see lounge and garden areas because it would have great views.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. The views are going to be great from up there. And on the plan, we've noted some green areas for outdoor spaces. Also thinking about where solar panels might go. So there's lots of opportunities for the rooftop. And that's one of the things that's actually we're pretty excited about. We also want to have some different shapes for the roof. So it's not just all, a giant crew cut haircut. So all of those things are going to kind of get balanced in the overall set of buildings.
Great. Russ asks, is there a way to control how fast trucks drive through the neighborhood?
Just to speak to that a little bit, seeing some cars on Poplar going pretty fast has, given us pause, and really one of the reasons we felt like the Safe Routes to School was a super good idea up there. There's some things that will definitely slow traffic down. For example, there's going to be parking along the street. That's going to slow people down. A narrower street section, because when streets are too wide, people just go really fast. And I think the particular spot we want to pay attention to is where the two pieces of the park cross Hemlock. And I think somebody mentioned that in the comments there too. I think there are a lot of ways we can use different paving patterns and different ways of treating the curbs to make sure that it's really clear to drivers that it is a pedestrian area. So I think it will slow down because of the activity along there, and because the street design is a little bit narrower and has the parking along the edge. But we're very aware of that. And there are other things we can do. We've got traffic consultants. So we want to make sure that the streets are safe and sized properly and have ways to slow people down.
Jeff asks, where can we find research indicating this level of high density housing will have a positive impact on our community? Yeah,
I think also, Jeff, maybe you brought that up before. I think in the region, we are getting denser because we have this, this need for housing that's really critical. Yesler Terrace in Seattle is certainly one good place to look for something that has both the mid-rise, and there's now a high-rise going in there. It's taller than what we're asking to do here. It's got the views, it's got a central park. So I think that would give you an idea of what this might feel like. I think that's the best comparable in the region. There are similar kinds of newer developments at this density coming up around the region. There's some in Woodinville, in Kirkland Urban is pretty interesting. So I think there's places that you can go take a look. Our retail consultants did Mill Creek. That came up the other night as something that people liked, as sort of a small neighborhood retail area. So those are the kinds of things that are being built in the region. I think many people are very happy that they're part of those neighborhoods.
Becca asks to please define affordability. What percentage will be considered low income?
I'll take that. One thing I would note as background information, there has been a long-going discussion about income levels in Delta, and particularly related to this project. The long-standing commitment based on long-standing dialogue between the community and the city of Everett has been that the housing authority, based on a policy of poverty decentralization, would not increase the low-income housing supply beyond one-to-one replacement for the existing public housing. That's 244 units. We have 105 units currently in construction, about ready to complete at a project called Madrona Square, which is adjacent to Park District, which leaves us 139 units. So we would expect to keep our commitments to the 139 units. And those units will be subsidized, low income. Typically, that would be 80% and below. But a large portion of our subsidized projects tend to be 60% AMI and below.
Jeff asks, where will the proposed 12-story building go?
Yeah, I think we could show you back on the plan again. There are 4 taller buildings up to 12 stories, mostly along the, yeah, here we go. That's perfect. Yeah. Yeah, Ted, why don't you take that?
Sorry, I was muted there. You can see the overall plan is sort of an underlay, and the orange boxes show you kind of the footprints of what we're proposing for tower sites. And when we say towers, that's really like a 12-story building. It's not like what you would see, for example, in Seattle, where you're 240 to 400 and even more. So to give you a sense of that, when we go to the overall view, they're really like another step up from, you know, your sort of what we call a mid-rise project, or you know, a 6 to 7 story product that you kind of see in the foreground there. So there's just another sort of level or bump up when you get to the tower heights, and you can see how they're set up there. I don't know if you could see my cursor, but I'm just circling the one on the far right, and then there's 2 more that are sort of pushed a little bit into the rear of this view just because of the orientation of this view, and then another one that's more in the foreground.
Great. Ryan asks, hoping these streets running through the middle have some sort of speed controls, speed bumps or brick to make it more pedestrian friendly.
I think we kind of touched on that, I believe, that we want to make the streets a little bit slower, so that they are more pedestrian friendly. Especially here, you can see in the picture where the Hemlock crosses the park. I don't know whether we'll do speed bumps or not. But again, those kinds of things can happen over time as well. But we will be designing the streets for slowing traffic rather than zooming along. And also, Fir and Hemlock don't go clear through. So they will be a little bit slower because you can't get up quite as much ahead of steam. But that's definitely something that we're thinking about, so that you have access by the cars, but it's really a very people-friendly kind of place.
Mike asks, what's the total project cost and what is the likely rent cost to be?
Don't have an answer for that. The project is a 10-year project, and so many of the costs are variable and we can't precisely predict. We've used kind of present day costs as a baseline number, which is roughly $750 million, which is just a general conceptual baseline based off of roughly what our costs are for unit costs today. And could you repeat the second part of that question, Natalie?
Rough estimate of rents.
Yeah, wouldn't be able to determine that at this time.
Mike also asked if you could speak to why the Delta neighborhood was the best location for this project and why not a more affluent neighborhood.
Yeah, I'd love to take that one. We've heard several similar perspectives. Our perspective is that, you know, I suppose a counter question, why somewhere else? We feel that Delta has long lacked civic and retail and other amenities that other neighborhoods have received over the years and over the decades. We feel Delta deserves a similar investment in the community. We likewise feel that the wider population who's looking for housing opportunity and access to amenities and public benefit resources that they currently don't have will greatly benefit for this in Delta. We feel that the location is very well positioned for transit. as well as access to the other civic amenities which already exist in Delta and also exist nearby in terms of Providence or educational opportunities at Everett Community College, Wazoo, and of course the public transportation corridor down Broadway. So we think there's a wide variety of reasons, both from an urban planning perspective, live perspective, that make a lot of sense. And then we also think that we own this land, and the problem set for this land has always been following obsolescence of the public housing, what is to be done. And the discussion we've had with the community and the city and other stakeholders over the last several years has been just this. What is the problem set? How do we solve it? And to date, this is the solution. And our aim is to take all of these comments tonight and those that we have accrued over past years and develop the best project we can in answering that problem statement.
Jeff asks, is there going to be a direct connection between this neighborhood and the college area?
We certainly have advocated for that. We don't own many of the parcels that would create that kind of pathway connection, but I certainly see that as something we and others have strongly advocated for. And I think that's something that the whole community can help us to work towards.
Russ asks, will they be adding 2 more buildings to the Madrona property on Pine Street?
I'm assuming that's we're talking about the lot that's just to the east of the existing Madrona Square that's just finishing construction. Assuming that's what the question refers to, our plans certainly at present show some townhouse style or simple garden style apartment development over on those parcels.
Russ also asks, when will you start tearing down the old buildings?
Undetermined, though we are working on it. Best case would be the end of this year. More likely would be sometime next year.
Mike asked if he was in opposition to this project, who could he share information with, or who would he call?
Certainly, I am a contact, and I would be the contact for the Housing Authority. There also are city representatives. Bob, who would be the best city representative for them to contact?
I believe Yorick at this point, planning director.
Okay.
Russ asks, how would this impact our property values?
I don't have an answer for that, but I think based on my professional judgment, it will impact property values upwards.
Julie asks, what does street vacation refer to?
Bob, you want to take this?
Sure. Street vacation means there's an existing public right of way that's either being removed or revised. So in this case, there are 4 streets that cross through the neighborhood, and because the widths of the blocks are much narrower than the plan here provides. So what this plan illustrates is we're eliminating one of the north-south streets, but we're also adding an east-west streets. Another thing is that the right-of-ways that we're proposing in the streets, well, actually, I'll just say the right-of-ways are wider than the existing right-of-ways. So while we're vacating one street and portions of other streets, again, we're adding new right-of-ways and one additional street. So at the end of the day, the amount of right-of-way that we're vacating versus the right-of-way that is being gained is probably going to be pretty close to even. Hopefully that answers your question.
Jeff asks, how can he apply for one of your properties?
These properties will not be available for quite some time. Probably not until 2027 at the very earliest, but at that time, Jeff can contact the Housing Authority, and our staff who would be representing the particular buildings would be happy to help service his needs and have any discussions about the properties.
Is there a email address you could share about existing properties, Jason? In case he was interested in those.
Just the EHA one.
Maybe somebody from EHA can drop that in the chat. That'd be great.
Sure.
Russ asks, have you decided if the corner of 14th and Pine will be closed off as a dead end and result in a walking path?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a kind of a funny configuration of the streets down there, and we thought we could simplify it a little bit. I think there's a message that went out to folks in that area about whether they wanted it open as a street or just as a walking path. And I don't think we got much response, so I'd be interested in some feedback on that, but we're working with the city on that. Jason, anything to add?
I don't.
Great. Question from Jean, will buildings be required to recycle?
There will be recycling facilities in the buildings. I don't think anyone's going to be policing that function, but it certainly will be set up for that.
Diane asks, what's the earliest possible time to break ground on anything in the project?
If we're talking about breaking ground of the first phase of a construction of an apartment building, earliest would be probably second quarter of 2025. So spring, summer of 2025 would probably be the earliest.
And then Tammy was asking, what's the time frame when you should maybe be done with the project?
These project types tend to be about 24 months in duration, construction duration, give or take a few months. So sometime in 2027 for the first phase.
Representative Fossey asks, what area would be the first phase? I can go back to it.
Yeah, that's a really good question. We have basically 4 quadrants. The northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest. The likelihood is that the northeast corner, and someone who's got a pointer can maybe point to that, across from Wiggins Hollow Park would be the first one. And one of the reasons for that is that we want to make sure that a lot of the amenities come with the first phase. So that would likely go first, hopefully shortly after the northwest quadrant. The park is a nice way to give us a zone between the south blocks. So those would come later.
Great. Russ asks, how would you handle water runoff on the property?
We have a team of civil engineers that are working with that. I think the soil doesn't percolate terribly well, but we will hopefully have some ways that we can have the stormwater be visible and taken care of in a sustainable way. A lot of it will head to a pipe, but we'll be working with the city to make sure we meet all their codes and be as creative as possible in the design.
Mike asks how many parking units there will be.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact number, but we've been working with Heffron Transportation, who is an expert in parking. We are trying to right size it. The parking will be in garages below the buildings. So you won't really see much of that, which we think is great. That the city has some, we'll be looking at the city codes. That will also be spelled out with detail in the environmental impact work to come. I think we are slightly under 1 unit, like 0.7 something per unit, which in looking at similar developments around the region seems to be about right.
Adam asks, eliminating systemic racism was listed as an objective or goal. How would this project reduce or eliminate systemic racism?
Well, I wish we could eliminate systemic racism, but I think what we can do is this invites people of all races to come live here, to live together, to be in community, to share facilities, to share open space, plazas, to celebrate together and to celebrate as part of the entire Delta neighborhood. And Jason, feel free to add to that.
That's well said, Leslie. I don't know that I need to add further. I would just say that the Everett Housing Authority's mission, which I think Adam is referring to, is that we create affordable housing, that we foster healthy communities where households thrive, and we replace systemic racism with equity for all. And to Leslie's point, you know, the scale of the issue and the scale of society is so large that we can all do what we can within our scale, and hopefully a little bit larger than our own personal or organizational footprint. And the aim of the Housing Authority is to do just that. And with this project, we aim to provide opportunity, we aim to integrate, we aim to provide a wide variety of public amenities accessible to all, celebrating human difference. The aim, as we move iteratively through these stages of design into the actual construction of the buildings to the management of the buildings, is to refine the ways in which we can help the community integrate and socialize and provide opportunity to all. And we'll just keep working on that.
This may have been addressed earlier, but Ryan asks to describe the project in phases. I think we kind of got that, but in case you feel like we missed anything.
Yeah, let me just add a few things, because I think specifically he's thinking about what the amenities are in that phase. I don't have access to a pointer. So if somebody.
I think the question also, Leslie,
Yeah,
might be
go ahead.
referring to, you know, phases in terms of sequential phases. And if I could just proceed
Please.
just for a second. You know, right now we're very focused on the first phase. The first phase is very consequential, both in terms of the ability to deliver, as well as provide a lot of the community amenities and public benefits that will serve as a foundational pillar for the rest of the community. The one thing I'd like to point out is this is a decade-long development plan. This doesn't happen quickly, and for that reason, we don't have completely established phasing. We'll deal with that on an iterative basis. However, we do have conceptual ideas about how that would work out, and our primary emphasis at the moment for the first phase would be on the northeast corner of that quadrant, northeast quadrant, and then we perceive that the second phase would be most likely the adjacent one to the west on the northwest corner. But with that, there could be iterative changes that move us in another direction. But we do feel fairly confident to suggest that phase one will be the north east corner. That's kitty corners from Wiggums Hollow, and that does function as kind of the civic and social base with a wide variety of retail, civic, and other pillar tenants in those spaces.
Great. Let me just go back to the chat here. Jean asks, is there space for community meetings of sorts?
There will be, certainly. I think two of the main things that I would like to highlight, certainly things that have evolved through partnership discussions that we've been having with the various entities. One of them would be the gathering space at KSCR, which is a similar space conception to, if anyone's familiar with the KXP space in downtown Seattle. That certainly will be a community space accessible for all. Another space will certainly be available at the library, should the library be able to come to fruition. We're in discussions with the library and the city, and we hope to find a pathway for funding and a mechanism to make the library real. But the intent certainly would be to have the library serve as a civic pillar for other meeting spaces. We also have meeting spaces at our other facilities existing adjacent to the Park District at Bakerview, and we also have exterior spaces over at the new Madrona Square.
Great. I think that also kind of answered Ryan's question about community space for meetings like for the Delta Neighborhood Association. or community art activities or that sort of thing, but I think you kind of got to that. Diane asks, how far is the current closest library?
Downtown.
Okay, and I think we're at the end of the Q&A. I'm just going to give folks a second here, in case there's any final questions.
I just wanted to reiterate the process a little bit more. You know, people say that there are unknowns to all your questions because this process goes step by step. So we're still stepping through the process. So it's not like you just go get a building permit, like I think someone's saying, like a private developer. This is a process that gets plan development ordinance through the city, the PDO. So this is our first take at the design. It will go through the environmental process. It will go through the city's permitting process. So it's not the time where we've got everything figured out. So we are part of a process that we hope will help us refine a design that works best for the city's needs and for the neighborhood's needs.
I'll add to what Leslie said. And another component of the plan development overlay will be a set of design standards. So while the buildings that end up being built will probably have somewhat different building footprints, the design standards will set forth some of the minimum standards of what you can do in terms of the frontages of the streets, the sidewalk widths, the modulating the buildings, how some of the site is designed and the pedestrian access. So those are what we'll be working with the city on. With those, we're preparing a draft, but this will go through the process together with the rest of the plan development overlay application.
Great. Just a couple more questions came in. Bryce asks if there's any dog parks in the area.
I think a new one just opened.
Jeff just answered the question. There's a new dog park at Jackson Park.
Yeah.
And Bryce
Jeff.
asks, if light rail goes to the college, would we plan to have it come here?
I would just say we don't have any influence over the direction of the light rail. The only comment I could provide to that, though, is there have been suggestions should the light rail continue further along Everett Station. There's talk that it seems logical that it would continue towards Everett Community College. So we're hopeful that that does occur over time.
Fred asks, what about the use of solar panels on top of buildings?
We certainly would expect some use of solar panels on the buildings. As we discussed, Fred, we're a long ways away from designing the individual buildings, but there would be an expectation that there should be some solar panels. Not sure on exactly which buildings or to which extent, but we would expect to see some.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. Just going to give it 1 second. Jason, anything you would like to say in closing?
I think in closing, I just would like to thank everyone for your time. It's very much appreciated. We understand it's your own private time, and we really appreciate you offering it up to the community and to us to have this discussion tonight. I just want to reiterate some of the words that Leslie has spoken about. This is an iterative process. It's a very step by step process. We don't control the process. However, we do try to be very compliant, and we try to be as community oriented as we possibly can in responding to the requirements of the process. We've worked very, very hard and invested millions of dollars to date in trying to get a design program that reflects the largesse of community input. We understand we can't make everyone happy, but we're certainly trying as hard as possible to make most of you happy. and at the same time be very sensitive to future residents over several decades and their need to have accessibility and services and proximity to resources in the community. And we will continue to work day by day to try to bring this fruition in a way that really makes everyone as happy as possible and really provides the ability to socially engage with your neighbors and take advantage of a lot of the amenities and resources and the housing that this project will provide. So thank you very much. We look forward to future conversations and have a great evening.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Night, everyone.